The inventor's paradox shows up in places you might not expect. It says that solving a general problem is often easier than solving a specific one. That might sound backward. Most people think that the more narrow the question, the simpler it should be to answer. But that's not always the case, especially when you're trying to build or discover something new. Imagine you're writing a computer program to sort a list of 5 names. You could sit down and figure out how to compare those 5 names, swap them around, and figure out how to compare those 5 names, swap them around, and eventually get them in alphabetical order. But your code would only work for those 5 names. If someone gives you 6 names or 10 or 100, your solution falls apart. You'd have to write new code every time. Instead, if you take a step back and solve the problem of how to sort any list of names, no matter how long, you actually get a more powerful and, surprisingly, often a simpler solution. You only have to solve the problem once, and it works everywhere. This kind of thing happens a lot in math. One story people tell involves Carl Friedrich Gauss. When he was a kid, his teacher told the class to add up all the numbers from 1 to 100. The teacher thought it would keep them busy, but Gauss didn't add them one by one. He saw a pattern. He realized that 1 plus 100 is 101, 2 plus 99 is also 101, and so on. He figured out you could pair the numbers up like that. There are 50 pairs, each adding 201. So the answer is 50 times 101, which is 5,050. He didn't solve just that problem. He solved the general problem of adding the numbers from 1 to n. His approach works no matter what number you end on. That's what the inventor's paradox is about. If you try to solve a narrow problem, you might miss the bigger picture. You end up designing something that only works in one case. But if you aim for the more general version, you often end up with a cleaner, more elegant solution that covers more ground. Let's say you're building a chair for someone who weighs exactly 150 pounds and is 5 feet 10 inches tall. You measure everything to fit that person. The height of the seat, the angle of the backrest, the position of the armrests, it's all perfect. But now imagine someone heavier sits in it, or someone shorter. Your chair may not work for them. If you had instead asked, how can I design a chair that works for a wide range of people? You might have made something adjustable or something shaped in a way that naturally fits many body types. You would have ended up with a better chair, even for the original person. This paradox comes up in software all the time. A team might be asked to build a feature for one client. They think, okay, we'll just write the code that handles this exact case. But that code becomes hard to maintain. Later, when another client asks for something similar, the team realizes they have to rewrite the whole thing. If they had stepped back and asked, what's the general pattern here? They might have built a flexible system from the start. The extra effort early on saves time in the long run. It's not just about saving time. Thinking generally often makes the problem easier to reason about. When you aim for a specific case, your brain has to juggle every tiny detail. You get lost in exceptions and edge cases. But when you step back and look at the general case, patterns appear. You can make rules that cover everything at once. Your solution becomes simpler, even if it handles more situations. Picture someone trying to tile a bathroom floor. They're working around weird corners and odd angles. They cut each tile to fit just right. It takes forever. Now think about someone laying tile in a square room. The job is faster because the pattern repeats. But here's the thing. If you designed a tile pattern that could handle any room shape, maybe by using smaller tiles that fit together like a puzzle, you wouldn't need to cut so much. The general solution reduces the amount of work, even though it seems like it should be harder. There's a deeper reason why this happens. Specific problems come with constraints. They tie your hands. They force you to work in a narrow box. General problems don't have those same limits. You have more freedom to explore different ideas. That freedom can lead to better solutions. Problems don't have those same limits. You have more freedom to explore different ideas. That freedom can lead to better solutions. In science, this shows up all the time. Newton didn't try to explain why apples fall from trees. He tried to explain why anything falls and why the moon stays in orbit. By asking the general question, he found a single law of gravity that explains both. If he had only asked about apples, he might have missed the connection. The same thing happens in design. A graphic designer might be asked to create a poster for one event. If they make a layout that only works with those exact words and images, it's fragile. But if they design a system, a set of styles, rules, and proportions, then they can reuse it for future posters, even with different content. The system makes the work easier, not harder. This doesn't mean you should always go big. There are times when the specific case really is all you need. But when you're stuck, or when the solution feels too messy, it's often because you're thinking too small. Zooming out can help you spot the pattern. A good example of this in practice is in recipe development. Let's say someone is trying to make the perfect pancake for their altitude, their pan, and their ingredients. They keep adjusting the amounts. It's frustrating. But if they learn the general rules of how ingredients behave, how eggs bind, how baking powder creates rise, how sugar affects browning, they can apply that knowledge to pancakes, waffles, cakes, or anything else. They stop guessing and start understanding. Even in writing, this idea applies. If you're trying to write the perfect email to one person, you might agonize over every word. But if you write something that works for a group, a clear, honest message, you might find it lands better for everyone, including the one person you had in mind. The inventor's paradox can feel wrong at first. Our instinct is to start small, solve one thing, then grow from there. But often, that small thing is tangled and hard to solve. The bigger, more general problem gives us more tools and more insight. It lets us create something that lasts. That's why inventors, real ones, the kind who build things, often don't work on the narrow request in front of them. They try to understand the broader problem. They build general solutions that apply in many places, and in doing so, they often solve the broader problem. They build general solutions that apply in many places, and in doing so, they often solve the original problem better than if they had focused only on that. The hard-easy effect is a pattern in how people judge their own performance. When tasks are hard, people tend to think they did better than they actually did. When tasks are easy, they tend to think they did worse. This effect shows up in many areas: sports, academics, and even everyday decision-making. It's a bias in how we estimate our abilities, and it can quietly shape how we learn, work, and improve. Imagine someone takes a very difficult quiz on an obscure topic, like 17th century naval history. After finishing, they say, "I think I got most of it right." In reality, they scored 30%. They overestimated their performance. Now imagine someone else takes a basic vocabulary test. They say, "I think I missed a few." They actually scored 95%. They underestimated how well they did. That's the hard-easy effect at work. Hard tasks make us think we did better than we did. Easy tasks make us think we did worse. It comes from how we process feedback and confidence. When something feels hard, we struggle to judge how much we really know. We might latch on to the few parts we recognized and assume we did fine. The struggle itself makes success feel plausible because we worked hard. But working hard doesn't mean we got it right. It just means it took effort. Easy tasks are different. When something feels too simple, we start to doubt ourselves. If it was easy for us, we assume it was easy for everyone. We think, maybe I missed something, or that felt too simple to be right. This leads to underconfidence. We second-guess our answers, even when we're right. We don't trust success when it comes without strain. Psychologists first noticed this effect while studying confidence in decision-making. They found a consistent pattern. For questions with a low rate of correct answers, people were too confident. For questions with a high rate of correct answers, they were not confident enough. They saw this over and over across different kinds of tasks: trivia questions, visual detection, memory tests. The pattern held steady. Confidence didn't match accuracy. It tilted based on how hard the task was. This matters because it affects how people learn and grow. When someone overestimates their performance on a hard task, they may not see the need to improve. They think they did fine, so they move on. They miss chances to learn. When someone underestimates their performance on an easy task, they may avoid similar tasks in the future. They might think they aren't good enough, even though they are. The bias can steer us away from helpful practice and feedback. In school, this can shape how students respond to different subjects. A student might take a tough math test and walk away feeling confident. Their actual score might be low, but they don't expect that. They feel good because they worked hard. Without feedback, they may think they understand the material when they don't. Another student might take a spelling quiz, get nearly every word right, and still feel unsure. They don't trust their success because it felt too easy. They might think it was a fluke. In workplaces, this shows up in how people assess their own work or decisions. Someone might take on a hard project, struggle through it, and feel proud. They may believe they nailed it because it was so hard, but their boss sees flaws they missed. The difficulty gave them a false sense of success. Another person might complete a simple report quickly and feel unsure. They think that can't be all and worry they missed something. They did fine, but they don't believe it. The effect also appears in how people train or practice skills. An athlete learning a new routine might overrate their performance if the moves are difficult. The effort tricks them into thinking they're better than they are. A musician playing an easy piece might underrate their performance, even if it was flawless. They don't trust their ease with it. The level of effort skews the judgment. One reason this happens is that people often use effort as a cue for success. We think if it was hard and I tried my best, I must have done well. This is not always true. Effort can mean struggle, not success. But we don't always separate the two. Struggle, not success. But we don't always separate the two. We also assume that tasks that feel easy are suspicious. We believe real success should feel like a challenge. When it doesn't, we doubt it. We mix up effort with outcome. Another reason is that we have limited access to objective feedback. Without clear answers or results, we rely on our internal sense of how it went. That sense is shaped by how the task felt. A hard task feels like a mountain, and reaching the end feels like a win. An easy task feels flat, and the end doesn't feel earned. These feelings influence our judgments more than we realize. The hard-easy effect can affect group settings too. In meetings or teams, people may speak more confidently about complex topics, even when they're not right. The difficulty makes them feel like they've mastered something deep. Others may stay quiet about simple insights, thinking they must be obvious or unimportant. Valuable input gets missed because it came too easily. The bias skews not just individual judgment, but group dynamics. This effect can also reinforce inequalities. People who take on harder challenges might be seen as more capable, even if they're not doing better. They appear confident and invested. People who do simple tasks might be overlooked, especially if they seem unsure. Their skill doesn't get recognized because they don't show strong confidence. The effect makes it easy to confuse effort with competence. There are ways to push back against the hard-easy effect, but they take practice. One is to seek clear feedback. Results and scores can help correct the mismatch between confidence and accuracy. Another is to notice the role of effort in shaping judgments. Just because something felt hard doesn't mean it went well. Just because something felt easy doesn't mean it went poorly. Taking a step back and separating those can help. Training in metacognition, the ability to think about one's thinking, can also help. People can learn to adjust their confidence based on past patterns, not just current feelings. If someone sees that they often overrate their performance on hard tasks, they can start to question that feeling. If they tend to underrate easy successes, they can start to recognize those patterns and adjust. It's not about perfect judgment. It's about knowing when to doubt your first instinct. In testing environments, researchers sometimes design confidence scales alongside accuracy questions. This helps people calibrate their self-assessment over time. The idea is to help people close the gap between how they feel and how they perform. It's not easy. The bias is strong, but with repeated feedback, people can get better at judging themselves. Even small moments show the effect. Think of a person solving a crossword puzzle. They take on a hard Saturday grid, finish half of it, and feel like a genius. They try a Monday puzzle, finish it in minutes, and feel like it was too easy to count. But the Monday puzzle was a clean win. The Saturday one was incomplete. Their confidence doesn't line up with the result. The hard-easy effect hides the truth behind how it felt. This kind of misjudgment won't always cause big problems. But over time it adds up. It shapes what we try, how we reflect, and whether we grow. It's one of those quiet mental habits that can steer us without us even noticing. Once you see it, you start to wonder where else it's been hiding. The green paradox is simple but hard to fix. It happens when we try to cut carbon emissions, but instead we make things worse. The idea comes from a real problem. Fossil fuel owners know their resources will lose value if the world moves to clean energy. So when governments announce future restrictions or taxes, owners act fast. They sell more oil, coal, and gas now before rules hit their profits. This causes emissions to go up in the short term, not down. The plan to help the planet backfires. Imagine a coal company that hears a carbon tax will start in 5 years. It owns reserves that are still in the ground. Once the tax hits, that coal becomes less valuable. Demand will drop, prices will fall, and profits will shrink. So what does the company do? It speeds up production. It sells as much coal as possible before the tax begins. The same goes for oil and gas producers. If they think regulations or bans are coming, they flood the market early. The result? Emissions rise before they fall. This is the paradox. This isn't just theory. We've seen it happen. In 2007, economists Hans Werner Shin and others studied oil markets and energy policy. They noticed that when governments announced future clean energy rules, fossil fuel prices sometimes dropped. Investors took this as a sign. Producers were pumping more oil to sell before restrictions came into place. Even announcements without action caused early extraction. This leads to a tough problem for policymakers. How do you make fossil fuel extraction slow down now, not just later? If you tell the world you're phasing out oil by 2040 but do nothing right now, you may trigger a rush to drill and burn. That rush increases emissions in the near term, which is the worst time for it. Climate models show that front-loaded emissions do the most damage. Carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. Early pollution locks in warming. One fix might seem obvious: ban fossil fuels right away. But that's not practical. The world still runs on oil, gas, and coal. In many countries, clean energy can't yet meet demand. Turn off the fossil fuels too fast and people lose heat, gas, and coal. In many countries, clean energy can't yet meet demand. Turn off the fossil fuels too fast and people lose heat, power, and jobs. Economies slow down. Voters get angry. Governments backtrack. We've seen this too. France tried a sharp fuel tax in 2018. Protests broke out. The plan failed. It's hard to push people off fossil fuels if there's no safety net. Another approach is to tax carbon now, not later. If you want to reduce emissions today, raise the cost of polluting today. A high carbon tax makes burning oil less attractive now, not just in the future. But this is hard to pass politically. Many voters see it as a new burden. Businesses argue it will hurt the economy. Poor households suffer most, as energy takes a larger share of their budget. There's also the issue of global coordination. If one country cuts emissions but others do not, the fuel gets sold elsewhere. This is called carbon leakage. Suppose the US taxes carbon and coal becomes expensive. Companies might just sell the coal to Asia instead. The planet still warms and US industry loses ground. Without a global plan, local action may not be enough. Some experts say the answer is to limit supply directly. That means governments should keep fossil fuels in the ground. They can do this by buying reserves and leaving them untouched. They can also restrict permits for drilling and mining. If the fuel can't be extracted, it can't be burned. This avoids the paradox. But it's expensive. Buying fossil fuel assets means paying market value for resources you'll never use. It's politically risky. And again, it only works if done on a large scale. One country acting alone won't move the needle. Let's look at a case. Norway is a rich country with large oil reserves. It also wants to be a climate leader. So far, it's cut emissions at home, but it still exports oil. The oil it sells gets burned somewhere else, adding to global emissions. Norway benefits financially while others bear the climate cost. If Norway stopped drilling, it would lose revenue, but global emissions might fall. However, that would only happen if other producers didn't make up the gap. In practice, Saudi Arabia or Russia might just pump more. Again, we see the paradox. This brings us to a core truth. Fossil fuel markets are global. If you limit supply in one place, prices rise. That rise draws out more supply elsewhere. It also hurts consumers. Poor countries that rely on cheap fuel suffer most. Their development slows. So climate policy must be fair, not just green. Otherwise, it fails. There are ways to soften the green paradox. One method is a global carbon tax, or a minimum carbon price agreed by many countries. This raises costs everywhere, reducing the chance that one country's effort gets undone by another's inaction. Another tool is a carbon border adjustment. This puts tariffs on imports from countries that don't tax carbon. It protects local industry and pushes others to act. Governments can also change investor expectations. If they act decisively and show clear, firm steps like canceling subsidies, ending new drilling licenses, and supporting clean energy, they shift market behavior. Fossil fuel producers may then see the writing on the wall. They won't just rush to extract more. They'll plan for decline. That reduces the paradox effect. Public ownership plays a role too. If governments own oil companies or mines, they can slow production by choice. They don't have to chase profit. They can manage decline in a controlled way. This avoids market panic. It also protects workers. transition plans become possible. Communities that rely on fossil jobs get time and support to shift to new industries. We also need better messaging. When leaders talk about banning fossil fuels, they must also show what replaces them. That means investing in clean power, electric transport, and home insulation. It means building the future before tearing down the past. If people see a path forward, they're more likely to support change. If they only see sacrifice, they resist. The green paradox doesn't mean we give up. It means we plan smarter. Announcing distant climate goals without near-term action can do harm. We must act now, not just promise to act later. And when we act, we must think about how markets respond. If we get the response wrong, we move backward. This is the hard edge of climate policy. It's not just about good intentions. It's about timing, design, and incentives. It's about understanding how markets move and how people react. The green paradox teaches us that delay has a price. It shows that policy must be both urgent and careful. We need to phase out fossil fuels in a way that doesn't trigger a last-minute dash to burn them all. That takes coordination, courage, and clarity. The paradox will remain until we solve that puzzle. Fredkin's paradox is about choice. Is what keeps the paradox alive. Fredkin's paradox is about choice. It says that the closer two options are in value, the harder it is to choose between them. At first, this sounds strange. You might think that if two things are almost the same, it shouldn't matter which one you pick. But the paradox says the opposite. When the difference between two options is small, we spend more time deciding. That doesn't sound rational. If the choice doesn't matter much, why do we struggle? Let's say you are picking between two job offers. One pays $101,000 a year. The other pays $100,000. They are in similar cities, offer the same benefits, and give you similar roles. You spend days thinking about the difference. You talk to friends. You make pros and cons lists. You ask yourself what that extra $1,000 really means. This is Fredkin's paradox in action. The more alike the choices, the harder it feels to make the call. This goes against how we think decisions should work. You might assume hard choices come from big differences. A choice between a job in Paris and one in Kansas City feels big because the lifestyle shift is large. You'd think a choice between two similar jobs would be quick. But that's not always true. When two options are very close, we start to look harder for any small edge. That edge becomes the focus. It grows in importance, even if it's minor. The paradox is named after Edward Fredkin, a physicist and computer scientist. He noticed how people struggle with decisions that seem minor. His insight was that we use effort to decide when it seems like there's something important at stake. But if the options are almost the same, the difference isn't important. So we end up wasting time trying to solve a problem that doesn't matter much. Think of someone in a grocery store. They're deciding between two brands of canned tomatoes. Both cost the same. Both look about equal. One has a label that says vine ripened, the other says no added salt. The shopper stands there frozen. Minutes pass. They try to figure out which label matters more. But in the end, either can of tomatoes will work fine in their pasta sauce. Still, the decision feels hard. That's Fredkin's paradox. You see it with students too. A student finishes an essay and wonders if they should use the word important or essential. They go back and forth. They look up definitions. They ask someone else. They consider the tone. They ask if essential sounds too strong. But in the larger context, it probably doesn't make a big difference. Still, it takes them 10 minutes to decide. That's Fredkin's paradox again. This happens because we think that if a choice is hard, it must be important. We often assume that effort equals value. So when we can't decide, we believe the outcome must matter. But Fredkin pointed out that it's the other way around. If two things are hard to choose between, that might mean the choice doesn't matter much. The more equal the options, the less impact your choice will likely have. That's the twist. Let's bring it into the workplace. Imagine a hiring manager choosing between two job candidates. Both have similar experience, education, and references. The manager spends hours reviewing interviews, rereading resumes, and calling contacts. It feels like a tough decision, but maybe that's because it doesn't matter much which person they pick. Either would do well in the role. The time spent trying to find a clear winner might not be useful. But the manager feels pressure. They don't want to make a mistake. They want to feel confident, so they dig deeper even when there may be no real answer to find. This is also common in tech product decisions. A team is deciding between two cloud providers. Both meet their needs. Both have similar pricing. The team debates for weeks. They make comparison charts. They look for reviews. They test small features. They look for reviews, they test small features. The more equal the options seem, the more intense the effort becomes. They don't want to miss something. But maybe the time spent deciding is a bigger cost than picking one and moving forward. Fredkin's paradox doesn't mean you should stop thinking about choices. It doesn't say that small decisions don't matter at all. It points out a pattern. When the choice is close, the impact of the decision is probably small too. Yet we tend to act like close calls are high stakes. That leads to decision paralysis. We hesitate. We search for more data. We try to make the perfect choice. But there may be no perfect choice. Just two good ones. There's also a cognitive part to this. Our brains want to optimize. We like the idea that we can always find the best option. So even if two options are very similar, we feel like we should find a reason to prefer one. We scan for clues. We build arguments. We worry about regret. We imagine looking back and thinking we should have gone the other way. That fear of future regret can trap us in analysis. Take we should have gone the other way. That fear of future regret can trap us in analysis. Take another example, buying a phone. Two models have the same features. One has a slightly better camera, the other has slightly better battery life. You read review after review, you ask friends, you try both in the store. Days go by, but a year from now you probably won't remember the difference. Either phone would work. Still, the choice feels hard in the moment. Fredkin's paradox shows up when we want to feel in control. Making a decision gives us a sense of agency, but we don't want to feel like we made a bad call. So when options are close, we stall. We think the hard part is figuring out which one is better. But maybe the hard part is accepting that the choice just doesn't matter much. In military planning, Fredkin's paradox can lead to delays. A commander might have two possible routes for a mission. Both carry similar risk. Both offer similar timing. But the team spends too long deciding. They hope to find some advantage that makes one clearly better. Meanwhile, time is lost. Conditions change. Sometimes it's better to pick quickly and move than to search for perfect certainty. This also applies in personal life. Think about relationships. Someone might date two people at different times and find both compatible. Then they meet both again years later and can't decide who to pursue. They analyze every interaction. They ask friends for input. But if the choice feels hard, maybe it's because both options would be fine. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it might mean the impact won't be as big as they fear. Fredkin's paradox offers a simple but powerful insight. When you struggle to choose between two things that seem equal, you're probably overthinking. You feel stuck not because the stakes are high, but because they're low. The decision feels weighty, but the impact might not be. That doesn't make you irrational. It makes you human. But knowing the pattern helps. When you notice the paradox, you can step back and ask, if it's this close, does it really matter which I pick? Often the answer is no. Fenno's paradox is a simple idea that shows up in a surprising place, how people view Congress. It goes like this. Most Americans say they don't like Congress. They think it's full of gridlock, noise, and people who talk more than they act. At the same time, many Americans say they like their own representative. They think their rep listens, works hard, and fights for them. This difference in opinion, disliking the group but liking the individual, is the paradox. The name comes from Richard Fenno, a political scientist. He spent a lot of time watching members of Congress in their districts. He followed them, took notes, and tried to understand what made them successful. He wanted to know how they stayed in office, why voters kept sending them back, even when people were frustrated with Washington. One of Fenno's big insights was about trust. Voters tend to trust the people they meet. They might not trust the system or the far-off noise of national politics, but they often trust someone they've seen in person, shaking hands at the local fair, or listening at a town hall meeting. A representative can build a personal connection. They can show up at events, call voters by name, and speak directly about local issues. That kind of contact matters more than big national debates for a lot of people. Fenno also saw that representatives know this. When they go home to their districts, they act differently than when they're in Washington. In D.C., they might take part in loud arguments or vote along party lines. But at home, they often speak in a softer voice. They talk about helping veterans, getting funding for roads or schools, or meeting with small business owners. They try to come off as hard workers focused on practical things. They know voters want someone who gets results. This creates a kind of split identity. A member of Congress can be part of the big, messy machine of national politics and still be seen as a steady, helpful figure back home. That's the core of the paradox. Congress as a whole looks like a problem. Individual members often look like the solution. It helps to think about how people form opinions. Most of us don't watch floor debates. We don't read the full text of bills. We catch snippets from the news or hear from friends. National coverage focuses on fights, scandals, or dysfunction. Local coverage, when it exists, focuses on what the local member is doing. Grants secured, meetings held, letters sent. It's not hard to see why one image would look worse than the other. Let's say you live in a district where your representative shows up often. You've seen them speak at your kid's school or cut the ribbon on a new bridge. You may not agree with them on every issue, but you feel they're trying. You might not feel the same way about Congress as an idea. That's a big group of people, many of whom you've never seen or heard from directly. It's easy to blame them for things not working. This personal touch has real value. Representatives often craft a home style, a term Fennell used to describe how they present themselves to constituents. This includes how they dress, how they speak, and who they meet with. One member might wear jeans and sit on hay bales at county fairs. Another might give polished speeches at Rotary clubs. Each choice helps shape how voters see them. A strong home style can protect a representative from national tides. Even in years when their party does poorly overall, they can survive because people in their district feel loyal. It's not just about politics, it's about personal contact and familiarity. It's the same reason someone might trust their doctor, but not the healthcare system. Or like their kid's teacher, but complain about public schools. This makes Congress hard to fix. When people are mad at the institution, but happy with their own member, they're less likely to vote for change. They send the same people back, hoping those individuals will push the system to work better. But when most members win re-election, the overall shape of Congress doesn't change much. Gridlock continues and public frustration grows. The paradox feeds itself. Campaign finance plays a role too. Incumbents raise more money. They know more donors and they have more visibility. They can send newsletters, make media appearances, and hold events that keep their name in the public eye. New challengers have to work harder to be seen or heard. And if voters already like their current rep, there's little reason to switch. Gerrymandering adds another layer. In many districts, the political lines are drawn in ways that make one party dominant. That means the real contest isn't between two parties in November. It's in the primary months before. And in primaries, the most active voters tend to be the most ideological. That pushes members to appeal to their base, even if it makes them less likely to compromise in Congress. But again, at home, they may sound more balanced or practical. They know how to adjust their message for each setting. The paradox also affects how members act in office. If they know voters mostly care about local results, they may spend more time securing grants or cutting red tape than working on national legislation. It's not that they don't care about big issues, but they know what wins votes. If their district gets a new post office or a cleaned-up riverfront, that's something they can point to. They can say, "I did this." It's harder to say that about a bill that stalled in committee or died in the Senate. Some members even run against Congress while being part of it. They say things like, "Washington is broken, but I'm here to fight for you." That framing helps separate themselves from the group. It tells voters, "I'm not one of them. I'm one of you." And it works because of the gap between national and local perception. Media shifts have made this more intense. National outlets now reach into local spaces through cable and the internet. But local coverage of politics has shrunk. Many newspapers have fewer reporters. Some towns have no local political reporting at all. That means people hear more about the dysfunction in Congress and less about what their representative is doing day to day. Yet even with less local news, direct contact still matters. Town halls, social media posts, and newsletters let members keep in touch and shape their image. Fennell's paradox doesn't mean voters are wrong. It just shows how context shapes perception. When you know someone or feel like you do, you judge them differently. You cut them more slack. You assume they're trying. But when you look at a group from the outside, it's easier to blame or doubt them. That's not just true in politics. It's human nature. But in Congress, it shapes everything from elections to how laws get made. This dynamic isn't new. Fennell saw it in the 1970s, and it's still true today. Members know how to work their districts. They know how to build relationships and keep their jobs. Voters want results, but they also want someone they feel they know. That mix of personal trust and institutional frustration is what keeps the paradox alive. Two people are part of a simple deal. Each person places an envelope on the table. Inside each envelope is a sum of money. One envelope holds more than the other. The amounts are not known to the players. One player opens their envelope and sees the amount. The amounts are not known to the players. One player opens their envelope and sees the amount. They now have a choice. They can keep their envelope, or they can switch and take the other one. Here's the twist. The player reasons like this. Suppose my envelope contains $10. The other envelope could have $5 or $20. If I have the smaller amount, then the other envelope has twice as much. If I have the smaller amount, then the other envelope has twice as much. If I have the larger amount, then the other one has half as much. So I think there's a 50% chance the other envelope has $5 and a 50% chance it has $20. Now I calculate the expected value. That's 0.5 times $5 plus 0.5 times $20. That's 2 to 50 plus $10, which equals $12.50. That's more than the $10 I have. So it seems like switching is the better choice. This is where the paradox begins. You can apply that same logic no matter what number is in the envelope. If you see $50, you'll say, the other envelope has $25 or $100, and the expected value is $62.50. Again, switching looks better. But this can't be right. You can't always gain by switching. The other envelope doesn't change just because you switch. You're not playing against a faulty machine. You're just picking between two fixed amounts. If the logic says you should always switch, then you'll keep going back and forth. It becomes a loop. But something must be wrong with the reasoning. Let's look closer at the logic. It assumes that the probability of getting the larger or smaller amount is 50 to 50. But is that true? Suppose the person who set up the envelopes used a specific rule. Maybe they picked a number, then either halved it or doubled it. But how did they pick the original number? That's important. If they chose a number from a known range, say between $10 and $100, then not every amount can be doubled or halved without leaving that range. If you see $10, the smaller amount, there's no $5 in the range. So the assumption breaks down. Or maybe they used a probability distribution to pick the first number. If that distribution gives more weight to small numbers, then the odds of seeing a small number are higher. That changes the likelihood that your envelope contains the smaller or larger amount. The 50 to 50 assumption doesn't hold anymore. The key problem is using expected value without a proper prior. You can't say the chance of the other envelope being higher or lower is equal unless you know how the amounts were picked. In most real situations, you don't have that information. The probabilities are not symmetrical. Without that, the expected value calculation isn't reliable. To make this clearer, imagine a setup. The host picks $10, then makes the second envelope by doubling it. Now there are envelopes with $10 and $20. If you see $10, you know the other has $20. If you see $20, you know the other has $20. If you see $20, you know the other has $10. Now you switch only if you see $10. That makes sense. But in this setup, the probabilities are not 50 to 50. The $10 envelope always goes with $20. So the player who sees $10 is always better off switching, and the player who sees $20 should keep their envelope. No paradox there. But that depends on knowing how the values were assigned. Without that knowledge, any reasoning based on guessing probabilities leads to confusion. Let's take another scenario. The host writes down two values, $100 and $200. He flips a coin to decide which one to give you. You open it and see $100. You wonder if the other envelope has $50 or $200, but here the other envelope definitely has $200. There is no $50 in this game. Your mental model doesn't match the game structure. You misjudge the possible values. Your expected value calculation includes a number that can't exist, that throws off your decision. This shows the real source of the paradox. It's not that switching is always better. It's that your estimate is based on the wrong set of possibilities. You're treating an unknown value as if it could be anything with equal chance of being double or half. That's not grounded in the actual method used to set up the envelopes. If you go back to the earlier calculation, say you see $10 and think there's a 50% chance the other envelope has $5 or $20, That means you believe there's a 50% chance your envelope contains the larger amount. But that can't be independent of the value you see. If you see a very small number, like $1, then chances are it's the smaller one. If you see a very large number, like $10,000, maybe it's more likely to be the larger one. The value itself gives you a clue, but using that clue requires knowing the distribution of possible amounts. Without it, you're guessing. Now consider this. Suppose the host picks an amount using a normal distribution centered at $100. That means most numbers will be close to $100, but occasionally much smaller or larger amounts appear. He then randomly decides whether to double or halve it. This changes the game. If you open the envelope and see $30, you can use the distribution to estimate whether it's more likely that the starting number was $15 or $60. That tells you how likely the other envelope is to be larger or smaller. But this approach needs the actual distribution. You need to use Bayesian reasoning. That's more complex, and it doesn't lead to the same neat 50-50 assumption. The paradox teaches a broader lesson. You can't rely on expected value alone unless you understand the full setup. A calculation is only as good as the assumptions behind it. If the setup is unclear or the probabilities are guessed, then the numbers you get are not trustworthy. This is why the paradox seems persuasive at first. It uses a clean logic, simple math, and an appealing idea, but the simplicity hides the flaw. It pretends the game works one way when it might work another. You get caught in a loop because the logic is disconnected from reality. You can think of it like this. Suppose you're walking down a path and see two roads. One looks shorter, but you don't know where they lead. Choosing based on appearance alone might send you in circles. You need a map, not just guesses. In the envelope case, that map is the method used to choose the amounts. Without it, the whole decision process becomes unstable. Every choice to switch leads to the same result, more uncertainty. You can't resolve it without stepping outside the assumptions and looking at how the game was built. This is why the paradox holds its shape even after you see its flaw. It's not the math that's wrong. It's the context that's missing. You can't judge the value of switching without knowing the structure behind the envelopes. Until you have that, the best move is to recognize what you don't know. You are offered a bet on drawing a colored ball from an urn. The urn contains 90 balls in total. You are told that 30 of them are red. The rest, 60 balls, are either black or yellow, but you are told that 30 of them are red. The rest, 60 balls, are either black or yellow, but you aren't told how many of each. Now, consider two choices. In the first choice, you can bet on drawing a red ball and win $100 if you're right. In the second choice, you can bet on drawing a black ball and win the same amount if correct. Most people choose to bet on red. That makes sense. You know there are 30 red balls, so your chances are clear. But with the black ball, you don't know if there are 0 or 60 of them. You lack information. Now a second set of choices. You can bet on drawing either a red or yellow ball. Or you can bet on drawing either a black or yellow ball. Most people now prefer to bet on black or yellow. That might seem strange at first. In the first round, you preferred red to black. In this round, you're choosing black or yellow over red or yellow. That means your choices are inconsistent. And yet this behavior is common. This is the Ellsberg paradox. It shows how people respond differently to known risks versus unknown risks. The known risk, betting on red, is more appealing than the unknown one, betting on black. But when the same ambiguity is present in both options, people shift their preference again. This behavior breaks the rules of expected utility theory, which assumes people weigh outcomes using consistent probabilities. In economics and decision theory, expected utility theory tries to explain how rational people make choices under uncertainty. The theory says that if you assign probabilities to outcomes and have a consistent set of preferences, you will always choose the option with the highest expected utility. But in the Ellsberg paradox, people's preferences shift depending on how the information is framed, even when the underlying probabilities don't change. The key idea in the paradox is ambiguity. Ambiguity is not the same as risk. With risk, the odds are known. With ambiguity, the odds are unclear. People are generally ambiguity averse, meaning they prefer known risks to unknown ones. That's why they choose the red ball bet over the black one. They have no clue how many black balls are in the urn, And that uncertainty feels worse than the clear chance of 1 in 3 when choosing red. Let's look at another example. Imagine a second urn, also with 90 balls. This time, you are told nothing about the composition of the balls, not even how many are red. You are asked to bet on red again. Most people will refuse, or at least hesitate. Without any information at all, they feel lost. They can't judge the chance of winning. Now imagine someone else offers you a bet from the first urn again, where at least you know there are 30 red balls. Most people will prefer that first urn. They choose partial knowledge over total ignorance. This aversion to ambiguity shows up in real life. Consider investing. Suppose you are choosing between a U.S. company and a foreign one. You know how U.S. markets work, how their companies report earnings, and what regulations they follow. With the foreign company, you know less. Even if both stocks have similar expected returns, investors often choose the U.S. one. They avoid the foreign stock, not because it's riskier, but because it's more ambiguous. The Ellsberg paradox challenges the idea that people make decisions purely by calculating odds and outcomes. It suggests people value certainty and shy away from missing information. That's not always irrational. In real life, ambiguity can signal hidden risks. When we lack data, we might assume the worst. This behavior may have evolved for good reasons, but it also means people often pass up opportunities that are statistically favorable simply because they feel uneasy. Some economists have tried to adjust for this behavior. One approach is to modify utility theory to account for ambiguity aversion. These newer models allow for different weights on known and unknown probabilities. Instead of treating all uncertainty the same, they give a kind of penalty to ambiguous options. This helps explain why someone might pick a lower expected value that feels more certain. A famous thought experiment helps to explain how deeply this aversion runs. Imagine 3 bets. In the first bet, you win $100 if a red ball is drawn. In the second, you win $100 if a black ball is drawn. In the third, you win $100 if either a red or black ball is drawn. Again, you know there are 30 red balls and 60 balls that are either black or yellow. If you pick the first bet, it's because you trust the 1 in 3 odds. If you avoid the second, it's because you don't trust the unknown number of black balls. But if you also avoid the third bet, where at least one color's odds are uncertain, then you're again showing aversion to ambiguity. Even when the third bet may give you the best shot, you hesitate. Ellsberg's work showed that many people display this bias. It's not a rare quirk. It's widespread. It reveals a deep gap between how humans would actually behave and how classical economic theory assumes they behave. Ellsberg's experiments were simple, but their impact was big. They opened the door for a field of study now called behavioral economics, which looks at how real people, with real emotions and limits, make decisions. The paradox also raises questions about fairness and trust. Imagine 2 job offers. One gives a fixed salary and benefits clearly written out. The other offers variable pay based on company performance, but doesn't show past data or performance metrics. Even if the second job might pay more, many will choose the first. It feels safer, not just financially, but emotionally. The lack of transparency in the second offer creates ambiguity. People feel exposed. In law, ambiguity also matters. Suppose a law has unclear language. Judges and lawyers might interpret it in different ways. The lack of clarity can lead to hesitation, cautious decisions, or even biased ones. People will try to avoid outcomes where rules are open to interpretation. They prefer solid ground. In this way, the Ellsberg paradox speaks not only to individual decisions, but to systems and policies that rely on how people respond to uncertainty. Some might say people should learn to think like expected utility theory says they should. That we should learn to ignore ambiguity and just focus on what the math tells us. But that's hard. The discomfort from ambiguity is emotional, not just logical. It feels different to make a decision when you're in the dark. Even if the numbers are fine, the feeling isn't. Ellsberg's idea, though simple, cuts through assumptions that have long guided economic thought. People don't always act based on pure calculation. They act based on how much they know and how much they don't know. And often, what they don't know shapes their choices more than anything else. The disposition effect happens when investors sell assets that have gained value while holding on to those that have lost value. This behavior goes against the basic rule of investing. Cut your losses and let your winners run. Yet, many investors do the opposite. They lock in gains quickly, even when the asset might keep rising, and they hold on to losing assets, hoping they will bounce back. This leads to poor performance over time. This effect shows up in many markets and across different types of investors. It happens with retail investors, professional fund managers, and even in experimental settings with fake money. That tells us the cause is deep. It's not about knowledge or experience. It's about how people react to gains and losses. One reason people fall into this pattern is because of how we feel about losses. A loss hurts more than a gain of the same size feels good. Psychologists call this loss aversion. If you gain $100, it feels good. Psychologists call this loss aversion. If you gain $100, it feels nice. If you lose $100, it feels terrible. So, when an investment drops in value, you may not want to sell because that would make the loss real. As long as you hold it, you can still believe it might go back up. You delay the pain. But when a stock goes up, you feel tempted to take the win. That feels good and complete. You lock in a profit. It makes you feel like a successful investor. But this urge to harvest gains too early often means you miss out on larger returns. Stocks that go up often keep going up, at least for a while. Selling too soon leaves money on the table. Now let's look at how this works in a real-life situation. Suppose an investor buys 2 stocks. She puts $5,000 into each. One stock rises to $6,000. The other drops to $4,000. She needs to sell one to free up some cash. She chooses to sell the one that went up. She tells herself it's good to take a profit. She says she'll wait for the other one to recover. But what if the first stock still has strong fundamentals? What if the second one dropped because of a permanent change in the company's prospects? By selling the winner and keeping the loser, she makes a poor trade. Over time, these decisions compound. Her portfolio gets filled with underperforming assets, while she misses out on growth from strong companies. The disposition effect also affects how people monitor their portfolios. Investors check the prices of their winning stocks more often than their losing ones. They talk about their wins more than their losses. This selective attention adds to the problem. If you ignore a stock that's losing value, you may miss signs that it's time to cut your losses. Or worse, you may double down and buy more of a bad investment just to average down, hoping to break even. Fund managers are not immune. Even though they handle large portfolios and get paid for performance, they still fall into this trap. Studies show that many managers are more likely to sell stocks that have gained rather than those that have dropped. This hurts returns, even at the professional level. There's also a tax angle. In many places, capital gains are taxed, and losses can be used to offset gains. From a tax standpoint, it can make sense to sell losing stocks and harvest the loss. Yet many investors do the opposite. They sell winners and hold losers, even though that increases their tax bill. This shows how strong the emotional side of investing is. Logic often loses to feelings. It's worth noting that some investors say they're holding on to a loser because they believe in the long-term value, and sometimes that's true. Not every drop in price means the stock is broken. Markets can overreact. But the key question is whether that belief is based on a sound analysis or on fear of locking in a loss. If the only reason you're not selling is because you don't want to lose money, then the disposition effect may be driving your choice. The effect also shows up in how people react to performance reports. Suppose you look at your investment app and see that your portfolio is down. You may feel discouraged and stop checking. You avoid the pain, but if the market rebounds and your balance goes up, you check more often. You want the reward of seeing a gain. This pattern shapes how you act, even if you don't realize it. Some platforms and brokers make this worse. If your app shows your gains and losses in bright red and green, or ranks your top performers, you may feel nudged to act in certain ways. Green looks good. Red looks bad. The design itself encourages the disposition effect. A smart investor needs to be aware of how these nudges can lead to bias. Let's consider another case. Say you own a tech stock that dropped 40% after a bad earnings report. You believe the company still has a future, but you're not sure. You've already lost $4,000. You think if I sell now, I lose for sure. But if I wait, maybe it comes back. That's a classic disposition moment. You're making the choice not based on future value, but based on past cost. Economists call this the sunk cost fallacy. That $4,000 is gone, whether you sell or not. The only thing that matters is what the investment is worth now and what it might be worth later. If it's still a good bet, hold. If not, sell. But many investors can't make that clean break. Breaking out of this pattern takes effort. One method is to set rules in advance. For example, decide that you'll sell any stock that drops 20% below your purchase price, unless you have clear evidence that it's still a good investment. Or decide that you won't sell any stock just because it's gone up, only if the reason you bought it no longer applies. Another method is to use third-party advice or automation. A financial advisor or algorithm can make decisions without emotion. They don't care if you're up or down. They care about expected return. The key is to focus on process, not outcome. Good investors don't always make winning trades, but they follow a system that gives them the best chance over time. The disposition effect breaks that system. It causes you to act on emotion and ignore data. That leads to mistakes. Recognizing the pattern is the first step. Once you see it in yourself, you can start to fight it. Even with awareness, the effect doesn't go away. You'll still feel that tug, the urge to sell what's doing well, and the fear of admitting a loss. But you can pause and ask, am I making this choice because it makes sense or because it feels better? That small question can stop you from making a costly move. Every investor deals with these moments. A friend might brag about a stock they sold at a profit, then say they're waiting it out on one that's dropped. That's the disposition effect in plain sight. You may nod along, but take note. It's a reminder of how common this behavior is and how dangerous it can be if left unchecked.